تكملة المحاضرة الكارديوفاسكولار سيستم. نقول هنا the stroke volume is regulated by three variables: the end diastolic volume and the total peripheral resistance with contractility or strength of ventricular contraction. يقول the end diastolic volume is the volume of blood in the ventricles at the end of diastole. It is called the preload. It determines the degree to which the myocardium is stretched before it contracts. The total peripheral resistance is the frictional resistance or impedance to blood flow in the arteries, and it is called the afterload. The preload as a factor controlling cardiac output equal the end diastolic volume is the amount of blood in the ventricles immediately before they begin to contract. This is a workload imposed on the ventricles before contraction, and it is called preload. The stroke volume is directly proportional to the preload. An increase in end diastolic volume results in leading to increase in the stroke volume. The stroke volume is also directly proportional to contractility. Afterload as a factor controlling cardiac output equal the total peripheral resistance is the pressure in the arterial system before the ventricle contracts is in turn a function of the total peripheral resistance. Equal the higher the peripheral resistance, the higher the pressure. The stroke volume is inversely proportional to the total peripheral resistance. A myocardial contractility as a factor controlling cardiac output equal the contractility of the myocardium exerts a major influence on stroke volume. It is also called the inotropic effect. Factors that increase the contractility a positive inotropic effect. من ضمن هاي الفاكتورز هي changes بالheart rate والrhythm. Then, when a more action potential per unit time معناها more calcium enters to the myocardial cells and greater tension is produced. يعني كل ما كان الأكشن potential per unit time أكثر كالسيوم أكثر حيحتاج ويدخل المyocardial cells و greater tension is produced. Well, post-extradiastole potential occurs in isolated cardiac muscle and is due to increased availability of intracellular calcium. Catecholamine اللي هو الدوبامين, epinephrine and norepinephrine exert their positive inotropic effect by an action on cardiac beta-1 adrenergic receptors. It increases the inward calcium current during the plateau of action potential. As a result, كل ما كان الكالسيوم يتجمع by the SR and more calcium is available for release in the subsequent beats. Sympathetic nerve stimulation to the heart equal the positive inotropic effect of norepinephrine liberated at the nerve endings is augmented by circulating level of norepinephrine and epinephrine. Xanthines such as caffeine and theophylline are positive inotropics, and digitalis and related drugs are also positive inotropics. The factors that decrease the contractility مثل parasympathetic neurostimulation of the heart مثلا when there is a negative inotropic effect of the vagal stimulation on the arterial and ventricular muscle. It decreases the force of contraction in the arteria by decreasing the calcium current. Hypercapnia, hypoxia, acidosis, and drugs such as quinidine and prosenamide and barbiturates also decrease myocardial contractility. While intrinsic depression is a heart failure, as in heart failure, reduces myocardial contractility. Well, loss of myocardium as in myocardial infarction also reduces the myocardial contractility. Well, athletes have more SV than non-athletes because of a stronger cardiac muscle, therefore their heart rate is much slower to have relatively same cardiac output. Well, hypotension also leads to less SV, therefore the heart increases its rate, causing tachycardia and heart failure. Heart failure simply means the failure of the heart to pump enough blood to satisfy the needs of the body. يعني فشل القلب هو فشل القلب لضخ دم كافي لكل أنحاء الجسم. If a heart becomes severely damaged, such as by myocardial infarction, the pumping ability of the heart is depressed. It may lead to reduced cardiac output and damaging of blood in the veins, resulting in increased venous pressure. Blood vessels and flow rate. The blood vessels are tubes that transport the blood from the heart to the body and back. There are 3 layers. All blood vessels contain an innermost lining called the endothelium and a type of epithelial tissue called the tunica intima. It plays an important role in regulating blood pressure, vessel growth, and movement of substances into and out of vessels. هذا واضح. All blood vessels except capillaries also contain a vascular smooth muscle in their walls called a tunica media. ذاك كان tunica intima اللي هو الابيثelial tissue. Then بالinnermost lining. هذا it contains a vascular smooth muscle in their walls called the tunica media. They contract because they cause vasoconstriction of the vessel, and when they relax they cause vasodilation. These change the blood vessel's diameter and have a significant impact on blood pressure. Well, outermost layer is called the tunica extra الأدمنشية, composed from collagen fibers for protection and anchor. تمام. So التونيكا externa والتونيكا media الوسطانية والتونيكا intima الinner. With the important blood vessels in the systemic circulation going from arterial to the venous system. شنو هن important blood vessels؟ الارتريز والarterioles والcapillaries والvenules والveins. الarteries يحتوين على thick walls, 3 layers of elastic vessels for high pressure blood. Arterioles هن resistant vessels. They are large and they change in diameter to adjust the blood flow. Capillaries, they are the thinnest walled and they are small in diameter for exchange. Venules, they are drain capillaries and have endothelium and some vascular smooth muscle. While veins, they are thinner walled, composed of 3 layers, and they are large in diameter for returning blood as back to the heart with low pressure. The flow rate is directly proportional to the pressure gradient and inversely proportional to the vascular resistance. يقول الفلو rate هو يتناسب طرديا ويا البريشر gradient وعكسيا ويا proportional vascular resistance. So directly proportional to the vessel diameter. يقول arteries serves as passageways for blood from heart to the tissues. arteries it serves as a passageway للدم من القلب للtissues. Then it acts as a pressure reservoir because of the elastic walls. blood pressure الطبيعي يكون between 120 for the systole, 120 for the systolic pressure, then, and 80 for the diastolic pressure. The pulse pressure is the difference between the systolic and diastolic pressure. Arterioles, it distributes the cardiac output among organs. هو يمد أو يغذي جميع أعضاء الأورجنز وأعضاء الجسم blood flow. Resistance varies as a result of vasodilation and vasoconstriction. Factors that influence diameter of arterioles يقول local control أو intrinsic local control Increase the blood flow in an active tissue مثلا skeletal muscle or the heart or the brain results from active hyperemia in the following mechanism. يقول لما يكون هناك increased metabolic activity حيزيد the levels of carbon dioxide and acid in the tissues and will decrease the level of oxygen. يقل نسبة الأكسجين. هاي التغيرات اللي تحصل بين نسبة الأكسجين والكربون دايوكسيد يكثر حتسبب relaxation للسموث muscle بالوالز مالت الارتريولز and this in return will cause vasodilation of the arterioles. فهذا حيسبب لنا blood flow through the vessel increases. So blood flow increases when a tissue becomes more active and the increased blood flow delivers the needed oxygen and nutrients. لأنه نسبة الأكسجين قل فهاي الفصل حتبدي تشتغل زيادة فوق طاقتها خلينا نقول حتى توفر وتوصل أقصى كمية من الأكسجين لجميع أجزاء الجسم حتى لا يصير هناك أكو tissue death. Extrinsic control equal a sympathetic vasoconstriction and parasympathetic. It varies in degree of stimulation of these two divisions. bulk flow يقول هذا it depends على الفلو type of blood flow. bulk flow bulk flow هو protein free plasma filters out of capillaries and mixes with surrounding interstitial fluid and then reabsorbed. البلازما filters out الارتريول البلازما filters هاي تسوي filtration للarteriole ends of capillaries because it is hydrostatic blood pressure and exceeds osmotic pressure. At the venous end of the capillaries, these filters tend to move back and because osmotic pressure now exceeds hydrostatic pressure, because the outward force of the arteriole end exceeds the inward force at the venous end, more plasma filters out than moves back into the capillaries. فهاي and lymph vessels pick up this fluid and transport it back to the blood. Venules are capillaries that drain into post-capillary venules which then join to form collecting venules to drain into the veins. venules هي capillaries شعيرات draining تسوي موجودة بالpost-capillary venules when they join which then join يلتحقن بالcollecting venules to drain into the veins. Microcirculation is the circulation of blood in the smallest blood vessels present within organ tissue. Veins, they serve as low resistant passageways to return blood from the tissues to the heart. They return blood from the tissues to the heart. They serve as a blood reservoir. The skeletal muscle pump helps return blood to the heart. When the skeletal muscles contract, then they squeeze the veins running through them. Because there are valves in the veins, the blood is forced to flow in one direction towards the heart. يقول this squeezing action is sometimes called the muscle pump. يقول هاي skeletal muscles هم تحتوي على يصير squeezing للveins vasoconstriction through them. ولأنه تحتوي على valves فهذا الدم المار بهذه skeletal muscles veins حتسوي flow يمشي الدم اتجاه واحد وهو اتجاه القلب وهاي أيضا يسموها بالmuscle pump. The skeletal muscle pump is extremely important in returning blood to the heart in exercise. Blood pressure. Blood pressure is the force per unit area exerted on the vessel wall by the contained blood. It is expressed in millimeters of mercury. All vessels have an associated pressure. However, the term blood pressure typically refers to the arterial pressure. Blood pressure شنو يعني هو الضغط الموجود بالأوعية الدموية بالarterial pressure. زين During the ventricular systole contraction, the blood pressure rises to systolic blood pressure. Then the pressure declines as the heart relaxes فنسميه بالdiastolic. فلما يصير contraction للقلب زين حيرتفع systolic pressure زين اللي هو top number اللي هو systolic pressure. بينما pressure declines when the heart relaxes ونسميه diastolic. When normal blood pressure in a 70 kilogram adult is 120/80. The arterial blood moves in a pulsatile flow, and major pulse points of the body include the carotid arteries with femoral arteries, with brachial arteries, with radial arteries. The carotid arteries are found in the neck on either side of the trachea. The femoral are found in the groin area. The brachial are found on the inside of the arms just above the elbow. And the radial are found on the lateral side of the wrist. In these locations بهاي المناطق تكون هاي الارتريز قريبة لسطح الجسم. فبهذه المناطق يتم وضع جهاز قياس الضغط، يعني نقدر نقيس الضغط لأن هاي الأوعية تكون قريبة من يقول arterial blood pressure is estimated using the sphygmomanometer. بهذا الدايجرام هنا شارح عملية قياس ضغط الدم باستخدامه. Maintaining blood pressure يقول systolic pressure بالطبيعي لازم يكون بين 110 إلى 120 والdiastolic يكون بين 70 وبين 80. أقل من هذا معناها أكو انخفاض ضغط الدم وأعلى منه يكون ارتفاع. Short-term controls. It handles acute changes in blood pressure through vasomotor center located in the medulla oblongata, and its actions are modified by baroreceptors that detect a stretch on the blood vessels with chemoreceptors that detect oxygen, pH, and carbon dioxide. بينما short-term controls that also handles acute changes in the blood pressure by hormones. مثلا الابنفرين والنورابنفرين ممكن يسبب vasoconstriction ويرفع عن blood pressure. angiotensin هماتين يسبب vasoconstriction ويزيد blood pressure. والantidiuretic hormone والendothelium derived factors والarterionatriuretic factor causes a decrease in blood volume and decrease in blood pressure. والnitric oxide هماتين يسبب decrease in blood pressure. Long-term control, an increase in blood pressure causes the kidneys to excrete more water. يصير diuresis إدرار أكثر. يزيد الإدرار لما blood pressure يكون عالي ومرتفع. This decrease in blood volume results in decreased blood pressure. So when the blood pressure ينخفض declines, الكدني حتفعل renin angiotensin system mechanism which increases the blood volume تزيد نسبة الدم ووصوله للكليتين. Hypotension means low blood pressure of below 110/70. Usually it is not a problem in healthy individuals. مرات يكون تعب. لكن in orthostatic hypotension it is a sudden drop in blood pressure هو انخفاض بضغط الدم بسبب postural changes. يكون مثلا نايم غلط أو قاعد بطريقة غلط ينخفض عنده الضغط. الكرونيك هايبوتنشن هو الكرونيك هايبوتنشن هو دائما شخص يكون ضغطه منخفض، وسببه يكون الأديسون ديزيز، لو تغذية ما يأكل يعني بشكل صحيح، لو الغدة الدرقية الهايبوثايريزم or tissue wasting. والأكيوت هايبوتنشن هو sudden drop بالبلد بريشر فجائي بسبب ممكن يكون hemorrhage نزف أو فقدان للفلويد loss، أو يكون التهاب مثل diarrhea or vomiting or burns or damage to the heart or excessive vasodilation. بينما الهايبرتنشن هو ارتفاع بضغط الدم إلى أكثر من 120/80 وصولا إلى 140 إلى 90 وأكثر. هناك أكو نوعين من الهايبرتنشن، هو transient والpersistent. الترانزيانت هو يكون بفترات الفيفر والفيزيكال اكسرشن والايموشنال upset يرتفع الضغط، بينما البرزيستنت هو بالأوبيس individuals يكون مثلا ضغطهم دائما مرتفع. Therefore, the diagnosis of high or low blood pressure is not based on one day's finding. لذلك يقول ارتفاع أو انخفاض ضغط الدم مو إثبات كافي، يعني قياس يوم واحد العفو أو قراءة مال يوم واحد ما تكفي، ولا هو دليل كافي إنه نقدر نثبت إنه هذا الشخص عنده مثلا high blood pressure or low blood pressure of a certain cause يعني. لذلك لازم يكون أكو هناك 3 measurements، 3 مرات ينقاس الضغط على أيام مختلفة حتى نشوف ونقارن القراءات. According to cause of the hypertension it is of 2 types. شنو أسباب الهايبرتنشن؟ primary hypertension، hypertension الأولي اللي هو معظم الكيسات سببها هو يكون سبب غير معروف and it is controllable، يعني could be controlled but not cured. بالراحة مثلا بالدايت ممكن يعني ينخفض. الفاكتورز that can contribute to primary hypertension، ما هي الفاكتورات اللي ممكن تودي أو تؤدي إلى primary hypertension؟ أول شي الدايت اللي يحتوي على أملاح وفات وكوليسترول، الأوبيسيتي الأوفرويت، الأيج، الفاميلي والفاميلي هيستوري، الستريس، السموكينج والدايابيتيز والهايبركوليستروليميا. بينما السكندري هايبرتنشن هو 10% من الهايبرتنسيف individuals يكون عندهم secondary hypertension، وسببه يكون عندهم disorders ثانية مثل hypothyroidism، Cushing's dream، heart diseases، kidney problems تكون سبب للsecondary hypertension. Shock هو failure of the cardiovascular system to produce the body resulting in marked low blood pressure. shock هو شنو؟ لما يكون انخفاض فجائي وسريع لضغط الدم فيصير shock بالبادي، لما يكون الكارديوفاسكولار سيستم الجهاز القلبي، لما يكون الجهاز القلبي فشل انه يوصل adequate blood to all regions of the body. cardiogenic shock يقول when the heart pump fails، لما القلب يفشل ضغط الدم يهبط وينخفض بشكل جدا سريع to a very low level near zero، وهذا جدا جدا خطر. فهذا مثلا example of it يصير بالcongestive heart failure والmyocardial infarction والcardiac arrest. الفوليومتريك شوك هو يحصل لما يكون شخص فاقد كمية كبيرة أو volume of blood or fluids، مثل لا سمح الله بinjury، peptic ulcer bleeding، و huge fluid loss by diarrhea or vomiting، وفترة طويلة no fluid intake. السبتيك شوك يقول السبتيك شوك يحصل لما أكو فد bacterial infection داخل الجسم. السبتيك شوك هو شنو؟ هو تسمم الدم. الشخص يكون مصاب في البكتيريال انفكشن اللي يدخل مجرى الدم، زين، لمن هاي البكتيريا تدخل داخل البلد فلو حيصير septic shock، فراح يصير immune response and the defense cells راح تبدي تهاجم الجسم، وراح يصير release of histamine حتى يعني انه لانه اكو جسم غريب بالجسم. فالهستامين هو vasodilator، وهذا راح يسبب انخفاض بالبلد بريشر. بينما الانافيلاكتيك شوك هو allergy. الانافيلاكتيك شوك يحصل لما يكون اكو شخص يصير بي allergic reaction، مثلا شخص عنده allergy من البينات المكسرات مثلا، او نوع من انواع الفودز، لما يتعرض إلى او يشتمه او يكون قريب من عنده مثلا يصير عنده allergic reaction، يصير عنده anaphylactic shock، بحيث الجسم يقوم يفرز كميات كبيرة من الهستامين، فنشوف هذا الشخص يقوم يورم أو المجرى التنفسي يقوم ما يقدر يتنفس عادل، فهنا نحتاج EpiPen. بهذه الحالة هماتين ال blood pressure drops. Symptoms and side of circulatory shock: hypotension، يكون systolic pressure below 90, pale, cool and moist skin, confusion, a rise in heart rate, frequent urination and acidosis. الكدني urinary system. basic kidney anatomy يقول ال kidneys are paired. يقول هناك أكو 2 pairs of kidneys. They are about 150 grams each and they consist of the cortex and the medulla. The cortex and medulla are composed of nephrons and blood vessels, the urine collecting and expelling units in sequence. الكالسيز والrenal pelvises والureters والbladder والurethra. يقول اليورين الإدرار flows من الكالسيز للrenal pelvises، وبعدها يوصل للureters، بعدها للurinary bladder، ومنها للurethra and out of the body. The bladder is under both the voluntary and autonomic control. إرادية، الجهاز الإرادي. يقول metabolic waste product excreted بالurine are urea from protein, uric acid from the nucleic acid, creatinine من المصل creatinine، والbilirubin and products من الهيموغلوبين breakdown. هذا جدا مهم. metabolic waste products excreted بالurine يعني waste products اللي تنفرز ويا اليورين شنو مصدرها، من جاية. kidney function. يقول kidney function it regulates the volume of ECF اللي هي plasma والinterstitial fluid by maintaining a balance between the output of the water in the body والintake. And it also regulates the concentration of the electrolytes. تنظم concentration مالت electrolytes. And it also plays a role in short-term and long-term regulation of blood pressure. وكذلك تحافظ على مستوى blood pressure. Eliminating waste products، إخراج أو طرح هاي waste products مثل اليوريا والكرياتينين واليوريك أسيدز خارج الجسم، هن toxins. هاي وظائف الكدني. وكذلك it regulates the pH within the respiratory system. والkidney acts as an endocrine gland producing hormone by secreting hormone erythropoietin and renin production of calcitriol. النفرون هو structural and functional unit of the kidney. It is fundamental urine producing unit of the النفرون هو جزء مهم من الستركتشر مالت الكدني، ومهم ضمن عملية تكوين الإدرار of the kidney. يقول اكو two types الcortical nephron والjuxtamedullary nephron and يقول النفرون consists of two major parts الglomerulus with surrounding Bowman's capsule and a long renal tubule. الglomerulus it is made of capillaries اللي هي تربط الafferent arteriole وهي الafferent والcapillaries عندها single layer of endothelial cells attached to the basement membrane. Bowman's capsule هي encloses الglomerulus وعندها two layers an inner layer والouter layer. An inner layer covers the glomerular capillaries is called viscular layer والouter layer اسمها parietal layer. The space between the visceral and parietal layer is continued as the lumen of the tubular portion. يقول الرينال tubule هو يتكون من 3 أماكن أو مناطق البروكسيمال convoluted tubule واللوب of Henle والdistal convoluted tube. اللوب of Henle يحتوي على thin segment walls of the descending limb يحتوي على descending limb والlower end of ascending limb are very thin. Hair thin band and thick ascending limb. The distal convoluted tubule they are open into the initial arced collecting ducts called cortical collecting ducts present in renal cortex and 7 to 10 such ducts from straight collecting duct which passes to medulla forming the medullary collecting ducts. فالcomponents مالت النفرون هو شنو الجلوميرولس اللي يحتوي على tuft of capillaries for filtration والبومان's capsule اللي يحيط بالجلوميرولس والproximal convoluted tubule والloop of Henle for sodium reabsorption والdistal convoluted tube والcollecting duct for concentration of urine by water reabsorption وperitubular capillaries. The blood flow to kidneys يقول although the kidneys are small organs لكنها تستقبل أكثر من 25% من cardiac output. زين this makes the rate of blood flow to the kidneys about 1200 milli per minute والunique blood flow is extremely blood flow اللي يوصل للكدنيز هو جدا جدا مهم لوظيفة الكدنيز renal function حتى it regulates the composition of the volume of body fluids حتى تنظم مستوى body fluids. There are two sets of capillaries بالrenal circulation glomerular capillaries والvasca recta. glomerular capillaries هن they combine يتجمعن حتى يكون الafferent arteriole which breaks into the peritubular capillary network والvasa recta which is a loop-shaped vessel in the juxtamedullary nephron والafferent arterioles continue as these loops dip into the medullary pyramids. نحكي على هاي النقطة يقول kidneys regulate the hydrostatic pressure in both capillary beds glomerular والperitubular and by adjusting these resistance of the afferent and afferent arterioles. The afferent arteriole is short while the afferent arteriole that drains the glomerulus has a higher resistance than the afferent arteriole. The basic processes of the kidney هو filtration و reabsorption. زين هاي processes مالت الكدني أولا filtration وين يصير بالglomerulus that is driven by a hydrostatic pressure of the blood. زين water and small molecules are filtered while blood cells and large molecules do not pass through هذا الفلتر. والnormal glomerular filtration rate يكون 125 ml per minute. بينما reabsorption هو as a filtrate يقول بينما الفلترد fluid أو الفلويد اللي حيمر بالنفرون معظمها حيصير بيه reabsorption للدم 100% من عنده جلوكوز و HCO3 reabsorbed أو 99% مي والصوديوم. هاي كلها يصير عنده عادة امتصاص. والwaste products اللي ينطرحن للخارج هي اليوريا والكرياتينين واليوريك أسيد. therefore لما يكون هناك أكو فشل كلوي or impairment هو يصير impairment باليوريا والكرياتينين يزيد نسبته بالدم. secretion, a few substances are secreted from the blood to the tubular cells. Primary functions of tubular secretion: moving drugs into the urine. هاي هم أيضا مضاعفها: moving more urea and uric acid into the urine, removing excess potassium when regulating the pH. والexcretion, urinary excretion طبعا هاي من أهم وظائفها of substances depends على الفلتration والreabsorption والsecretion. A glomerular filtration rate can be defined as the volume of plasma that is filtered by the glomerulus in both kidneys per unit of time. المادة اللي تكون used for the measurement of glomerular filtration to be freely filtered and either reabsorbed or secreted by renal tubules should be non-toxic and non-metabolized by the body. The substances that have such criteria is insulin. وعلى سبيل المثال هو الانسولين، لأنه الانسولين هو بالfailure that is not produced in the body must be given by infusion. Filtration fraction, it represents the ratio of the glomerular filtration rate to the renal plasma flow, which is normally around 0.2 or 20%. شنو هي الفactors that affect the glomerular filtration rate؟ يقول glomerular capillary membrane اللي هي بها high permeability due to the special structure of the glomerular membrane، وهاي capillaries endothelium and the specialized epithelium of the capsule are made up of podocytes overlying the glomerular. كذلك السايز مالت هذا capillary bed والnet filtration. يقول the net filtration pressure represents hydrostatic and colloid osmotic forces that either favor or oppose filtration. Hydrostatic pressure inside the glomerular capillaries which promotes filtration, والhydrostatic pressure in Bowman's capsule which opposes filtration, والcolloid osmotic pressure of the glomerular capillary plasma proteins which opposes filtration. Glomerular hydrostatic pressure is determined by three variables under physiological control: هو arterial pressure والafferent arterial pressure والafferent arterial pressure. physiological control of the GFR and renal blood flow يقول sympathetic nervous system activation. Essentially all blood vessels of the kidneys including afferent والafferent arterioles are richly innervated by sympathetic nerve fibers. Activation can constrict renal arterioles and تقلل من renal blood flow, while moderate or mild stimulation has little influence. ثانيا hormonal and autacoid control of GFR and renal circulation، يعني natural biochemicals مثل serotonin angiotensin والهستامين همتين يأثرن على blood vessels with changes blood vessels ويأثر على مما يؤدي إلى تغير blood pressure. auto regulation of the GFR and renal blood flow يقول feedback mechanism intrinsic to the kidneys normally keep the renal blood flow and glomerular filtration constant. وهاي they refer it to as auto regulation. يقول شنو physiologic control of GFR and RBF is done by the following: a tuboglomerular feedback mechanism which consists of the macula densa cells with juxtaglomerular cells A secretion of the functions of renin. A juxtaglomerular cells of the apparatus secrete renin into the blood when the blood pressure is decreased. الجكستاجلوميرولار cells هن موجودات بالكلى، لكن يفرزن مادة الرنين لما يكون أكو انخفاض بضغط الدم بشكل حاد، فهاي تبدي كوظيفة دفاعية. وال extracellular fluid volume is reduced with sympathetic activity is increased. The renin-angiotensin aldosterone mechanism can be summarized as follows. لما يكون أكو low blood pressure الكدني حيفرز enzyme اسمه الرنين into the blood. فهاي الرنين converts a protein يسموه angiotensinogene اللي هو يكون produced by the liver إلى angiotensin 1. فالangiotensin 1 بعدها حيتحول إلى angiotensin 2 by the angiotensin converting enzyme اللي موجود بالcapillary walls. ال ACE inhibitors مثل الكابوتين اللي هو الكابتوبريل هو يستخدموه to lower blood pressure. والangiotensin receptor blockers أيضا as known as angiotensin 2 receptor blockers are also used to treat high blood pressures. الانجيوتنسين 2 يسبب لنا vasoconstriction فيزيد البلد بريشر، لذلك فإحنا نعطي ARBs حتى يصير blockage. myogenic autoregulation of the renal blood flow and glomerular filtration. والhigh protein intake and increased blood glucose. يقول الhigh protein intake is known to increase renal blood flow with glomerular filtration, and it is said to be increased within 20 to 30% within 1 or 2 hours of a person after a person eats high protein meal. الhigh protein meal حيزيد release of amino acids بالblood which is reabsorbed in the proximal tube together with sodium. For this decreases sodium delivery to the macula densa, which elicits a tuboglomerular feedback mechanism. For a similar mechanism may also explain the marked increases in renal blood flow and glomerular filtration. A tubular reabsorption of the glomerular filtrate. يقول unlike glomerular filtration, a tubular reabsorption is more selective. يقول substances مثل الجلوكوز والأمينو acids يصير بيهن إعادة امتصاص من التوبلز when they are too valuable to throw away. مثل الصوديوم والكلور والSCO3 they are highly reabsorbed يصير بيهن إعادة امتصاص. و certain waste products مثل اليوريا والكرياتينين ينطرحن من الخارج يصير بيهن reabsorption هواي. A reabsorption across the tubular epithelium includes the active transport mechanism, the passive transport mechanism by difference in osmotic pressure or by hormones مثل الالدوستيرون اللي هو مسؤول عن reabsorption of sodium والantidiuretic hormone responsible for water reabsorption. The primary active transport it is coupled directly to an energy source. يكون أو يتم هذا الترانسبورت باعتماد على نوع من الطاقة يسموها hydrolysis of ATP. A good example مثل الصوديوم والبوتاسيوم وال ATPase pump that functions through the most parts of the renal tubule. والsecondary active transport هو لما يكون مادة واحدة أو اثنين يتفاعلن مع بعض the specific protein and are co-transported together بعدين يتم نقلها سوا across the membrane. مثلا انتقال الجلوكوز والأمينو أسيدز للبروكسيمال tubule. Sodium glucose link transporter. الsodium dependent glucose co-transportant هن مجموعة من glucose transporters of two types, type 1 and type 2. التايب 1 هو بالintestinal mucosa of the small intestine, with 2 موجود بالproximal convoluted tubule of the nephron. الinhibitors are new الانهبيتورز هاي نوع جديد من انواع الدايابيتيز ميديكيشن، هن يأخرن or they delay الابزوربشن مالت الجلوكوز اللي تواجد بالسمول انتستين من السمول انتستين، ف they improve الدايابيتيك كنترول. بينما ال 2 inhibitors يسموهم بالجليفلوزينز they also are used to treat type 2 diabetes عن طريق targeting SGL2 receptors not SGLT1. فالجلوكوز is excreted يتم فرزه which in turn lowers blood glucose levels. والdual inhibitors اللي بها النوعيتين is a drug that inhibits both 1 and 2 receptors. الtransport maximum هو for most substances that are actively reabsorbed or secreted equal limit، زين يسموها بالtransport maximum. مثل example هو الglucose transport system. filtered load is the amount of substance that filters through the glomerular membrane into tubules each minute. الباسيف ترانسبورت for reabsorption هي substances اللي يصير بها passively reabsorbed because rate of transport is determined by following main factors: electrochemical gradient with tubular cell membrane with time that the fluid containing the substance remains within the tubule. Tubular secretion to the glomerular filtrate يقول it involves the transport of substances للtubular lumen عن طريق tubular cells themselves أو عن طريق peritubular capillaries. وأما يصير active or passive or co-transport substances that are secreted بالrenal tubule هن potassium and H3 والcreatinine with drugs like penicillin. ويقول a tubular secretion of foreign substances is important for clearing the plasma of those substances which could be a toxin. kidney regulation of salt and water يقول extracellular water regulated to control blood pressure and edema. excess water الموجود بالbody حيؤدي إلى swelling edema which can be harmful or even fatal. The blood pressure هو proportional to the amount of water in the circulatory system. If the water volume is low, the blood pressure will be too low to push amounts of blood throughout the organs. If the water volume is high, يعني blood pressure حيكون عالي which can lead to hemorrhage and strokes. A sensory receptors is used to monitor the status of salt and water مثل osmoreceptors والbaroreceptors. Osmoreceptors they tend to respond to changes بالosmotic pressure, while baroreceptors they tend to respond to stress caused by changes in blood pressure. Extracellular water is controlled by the amount of sodium. يقول a drinking experiment: if you drink a liter of water, the kidneys will produce large amounts of urine and eliminate it in a short period of time to keep the plasma volume normal. If you drink a liter of saline, the urine production is low and the water is retained for such long period of time. يصير بيها احتباس. A longer retention is due للosmotic pressure للsaline. If ADH is high, the kidney makes concentrated urine and conserves water. يقول when a person is dehydrated لما يكون الشخص dehydration فال blood osmotic pressure يصعد يرتفع فراح يصير secretion of large amounts of ADH و more water will be reabsorbed. حيصير امتصاص للماء الموجود بالجسم preventing further dehydration وراح يطلع لنا concentrated urine. لكن إذا كان ال ADH low الكدني حيسوي large volumes of diluted urine. شنو ال defects of the ADH mechanism اللي يسبب diabetes insipidus؟ الدايابيتيز insipidus هو نوع من الديزيز اللي راح يفرز لنا production of large amounts of watery urine. هذا اليورين ما راح يحتوي على السكر as it does in diabetes mellitus, and it can fail in two ways. The posterior pituitary does not secrete enough ADH, or the kidney does not respond to ADH. Aldosterone allows the kidney to make a separate adjustment of the sodium. The kidney can also adjust urine sodium concentration by reabsorption in the distal tubule, and this activity is under control of the adrenal cortical hormone. In addition, aldosterone and renin and angiotensin are involved in the sodium retention in a mechanism called renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism. الالدوستيرون يتم فرزه من الادرينال cortex mainly in response to a low blood pressure. Acid-base balance هو metabolic activities بالbody that requires regulation of acid-base balance. هو activity يسويه الجسم حتى يصير أكو موازنة بين الأسيد والبيس اللي يحافظ على pH. pH being regulated within a narrow physiological range effect when membrane excitability when enzyme system when chemical reactions. Many conditions مثل pathologic or otherwise can يغير pH. عادة the concentration in body acids and bases is regulated so that the pH of the ECF is maintained with a very narrow range of 7.35 to 7.45. هذا normal pH range لجسم الإنسان. يقول هنا ال pH volume of 7 معناها ال ion concentration العفو ال pH هو inversely related to the H ion. Low pH indicates a high concentration of H, and high H is a low concentration, and the high pH is a low concentration. Metabolic acid and HCO3 production. يقول acids are continuously generated and byproducts of metabolic processes. They fall into two groups, volatile acids and non-volatile or fixed acids. There are 4 acid-base disturbances هي metabolic acidosis مثل lactic acidosis بالexercise والketoacidosis بالdiabetes والingestion of acids or acid-forming substances والloss of alkaline in diarrhea. والmetabolic alkalosis examples منها هي ingestion of alkaline or alkaline-forming substances والvomiting of gastric contents. Respiratory acidosis examples منها obstructive lung disease من يصير أكو obstruction باللung مثل الأزمة أو COPD والrestrictive lung disease والneurogenic respiratory disease. respiratory alkalosis هو لما يصير hysterical hyperventilation. blood pH must be kept close to 7.4 ضمن normal range. أكو buffers and mixtures اللي of chemicals اللي عادلن pH or stabilizes pH اللي هي buffer mixtures اللي تتكون من البيس والأسيد اللي يقاومن changes pH. A chief blood buffer is a mixture of bicarbonate and carbon dioxide. A CO2 acts as an acid while HCO3 acts as a base. يقول the blood pH is regulated by the lungs and kidneys. Renal compensation for respiratory and for metabolic disturbances equal in response to acidosis, a renal tubule secretion exchanges for sodium and potassium راح يصير لنا reabsorption of HCO3 راح يصير production of new bicarbonate during acidosis production of ammonia بالproximal tube cells during acidosis. It helps to remove excess H by forming ammonium in the tubule. راح يصير excretion of the acid in the forms of free H ion باليورين، حيعطينا acidic urine. and response to alkalosis، هاي هناك بالresponse to acidosis، هاي response to alkalosis راح يصير inhibit tubal secretion and excretion of H، inhibit tubal synthesis of NH3، راح يصير inhibition reabsorption of SCO3 و excretion of an alkaline urine with high bicarbonate concentration. شنو هي ال effects of abnormal pH on molecular level? Because of the rate of most enzyme catalyzed reactions in the body are sensitive to pH، تغيرات بسيطة لل pH can cause large and disadvantageous changes بالbody function، تغيرات جدا بليغة بالbody functions مثل الهرمونات، مثل effects of abnormal pH مثل ال CNS dysfunction، من يصير acidosis حيصير depressed excitability، والalkalosis حيصير increased excitability، والelectrolyte disturbances مثل البوتاسيوم والصوديوم والكالسيوم والاريثيميا. ولهنا وصلنا إلى نهاية المحاضرة، نتمنى لكم كل التوفيق.